Hello, everyone. Welcome to our annual conference for the Fordham Institute for Women and Girls at Fordham University, New York City. I am an Associate Dean and Professor at Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service in New York, and I'm also co-chair of Fordham Institute of Women and Girls. And I co-chair this with Dr. Sandra Turner, Associate Professor at Fordham, who you'll hear from shortly. Been involved with the Institute for Women and Girls for over 20 years. And our goal is to promote gender equality and equity through interdisciplinary education, research, and practice. We do this locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. We are firmly committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 of promoting gender equality. For many years, we've organized a conference during the NGO Commission on the Status of Women, which always takes place in March. We are intergenerational and interdisciplinary, as well as international, and this conference will reflect this approach. A conference takes place only with the help of many. So now I'd like to acknowledge our planning committee. Dr. Sandy Turner, the co-chair of the Institute for Women and Girls with me. Dr. Pat Brunell, Associate Professor Emerita from Fordham. Dr. Gabriella Casper from Australia, who's been our partner with IHAN for many years, and also with Dr. Shiroz Rohan. And also on our planning committee, we have Christine Treglia from Fordham, who's been part of our committee and also works at IT. We have Shanae Osborne, who's the International Federation of Social Workers representative and a former GSS student. And we have our current students. We have Cece Ogden, Linda Levine, Matthew Giblin, Cindy Aquiller, Hallie Mistre, and Doreen Dorsley, as well as our terrific IT team. Trish Rodriguez, who's in charge of operations and events at Fordham, GSS, and Matthew Roach, who's our technical advisor in helping us today. This year, the focus of CSW is really climate change. And so we've adopted this theme, and you can hear this in our title, The Many Faces of Resilience, Girls and Women of All Ages Leading the Fight Against Climate Change. I know you may have many questions and comments from what you're going to hear today. Please put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer. If you want to get in touch with any of our speakers afterwards and you don't know their emails or me, please email me. And my email is congress@fordham.edu. So now let's begin our program. And first, I'm just going to introduce you briefly to Shanae Osborne. And as I said before, she represents International Federation of Social Workers at the United Nations. And she's also co-editor of my next 2 books, which will be part of the UN book series. And also she's a recent graduate from Fordham, GSS. And she developed this terrific video, which we're going to see right now. But let's, Shanae, let's hear from you first.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say a quick word and say thank you so much, first of all, for always including me in this. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I love working with Sandra Turner, Pat Brunell, Gabrielle, of course, Dr. Congress, Thoreauge, so everyone. And so I just want to say a couple words to say thank you so much. I really enjoy even the minimal amount of work that I get to do, like this video. Just a little bit of impact really means a lot. So thank you. Enjoy the conference, and I hope you enjoy the video.
And thank you. And I always love that because that's a great way to begin. And you can see just how how wonderful all of you are, and we all are. So I think this is a great way to begin our conference. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Hori Gita, who is the head of the Committee of the Status of Women at the United Nations. And we're so pleased that she can join us. She is so busy these 2 weeks with 750 parallel events for just starters and of many other programs that she's involved with. So it's a great pleasure that she's one of the highlights of our program. She's also the United Nations coordinator of Unchained at Last, which is an ECOSOC US accredited NGO that fights to stop early marriage in the United States. She's truly multidisciplined because not only is she an advocate who has formed and helped develop many women-led advocacy groups, but she's also a very knowledgeable businesswoman and a fundraiser. And I've found that sometimes women are maybe experts as an advocate, but they're not really as good in business. And Hori does it all. And she, one of the things I admire most about her is, how inclusive she is. That's why there's so many parallel events. And also, I'm very impressed by this. She continually reaches out to young people and really helps them move into leadership positions. We see this at CSW that she has and just in all of her interactions. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Hori.
Oh, what an amazing way to end my busy week with that introduction. I am humbled. Elaine, it's too much, but thank you. I'm truly humbled to be in this room of academics. As some of you know, I literally just got my degree at 50 years old. Well, let's see, 58 years old. Was it? I don't even know. So I'm awed by folks who have been able to take the academic route. I did take the business route first, and now here I am advocating for women's and girls' rights at the NGO CSW. I love this group because you do represent intersectional and also intergenerational approach. You are absolutely right, Elaine. What really drove me even 10 years ago when I first got to NGO CSW was the idea of bringing younger voices. At the time, I could say that I was probably one of the youngest ones in the committee. No, I'm not anymore because we're doing something about that. Not only we diversify the committee, but I am extremely proud of our young professionals, youth leaders. And the way I'm going to do my presentation, and I hope you don't mind, I'm just going to talk from my heart and I'm going to drop some links for people to just follow because there's so much information that one of our youth leaders has created. If anybody has done anything with NGO CSW, you might have emailed and come across Devin. So Devin was our intern maybe 3-4 years ago. And I saw something in her. I had already brought a lot of interns by then, but she not only took the job of office manager from being an intern, she is now our program manager. She literally manages the forum. It's between her and me, believe it or not, all of those 700. And we have one IT person and a couple of interns, but all of these links that I'm going to share with you, it's actually the product of Devin Zingler. I have to give her credit. She does amazing work. So what is NGO CSW? And I know many of you know, and I still remember Pat and Elaine and Soros in our monthly meetings at Church Center. I miss gathering in person together, and I know we're going to do that again. This year, we definitely were 100% virtual one more time. This was our second year, and Elaine is right. We ended up with 777. I don't know what that means. I just like saying the number 3 sevens. It just turned out to be that way. Plus our own events, which were conversation circles and caucuses, global caucuses. So what we do is really bring global advocates and activists' voices into the UN. We are a nonprofit committee, a coalition of NGOs and individuals, actually. You know, you don't have to be ECOSOC accredited, and that's one of the things why I like what it is that we do, because UN is restricted. Not everybody can get into the UN, not everybody can speak to their governments. So we make sure that we bring either the governments to us or we collect our recommendations and bring it to the governments. Last year, we broke every record there was because we had 27,000 people attend our virtual platform, which I still can't figure out who these people are and how they did it, but we have them, we have their email addresses. And I'm just in awe of the global movement who wants to be heard. And it's interesting, I'm going to bring an example. Just today, there was a parallel event from my organization that I represent. It's not my organization. Unchained at Last is a very small US-based organization who's trying to end early marriage in the United States. And the reason I'm connected with them is because I also am a survivor of an early marriage. From a community that was also surprising to many, because my parents were affluent and we were not in a religious or community that did marry off their daughters. And that obviously disrupted my life in some ways that I am proud to say that is behind me, but it definitely affected me. So one of the things that drives me to both work with Unchained and do what I do is because I want to make sure every woman and girls out there knows their rights and has a voice. I mean, uses their voice, because we all know we have the voice. We just need to be able to use it. So to go back to NGO CSW, the first thing I'm going to do for those of you, I mean, I don't even know, are there people here who don't know NGO CSW? But let me just share our website, which is chock full of information. And if you have not signed on to our portal this year yet, please do sign up. We have one more week. And to me personally, the second week actually is my favorite because we're not rushed. A lot of ministers and high-level member states have left town and they have left negotiations to their experts. And it just like the level of intensity calms down a little bit and we get to really enjoy our conversations and events and also still be engaged in the negotiations. So to go back to what I said, last year, we were so proud to be able to gather that many activists together, but then the outcome document was still weak. And we were very disappointed that member states were not actually listening to us. And to tell you the truth, even myself, I was not able to engage with the Bureau to the level that we need to be engaged. And the Bureau are the 5 member states from each region that actually runs the Commission on the Status of Women. And please ask me questions if I'm going too fast or if I'm saying things that doesn't make sense, but you guys are all smart. I know you get this. So what we did was we refocused our attention and we said, you know what? It's not important to keep going after the numbers because sometimes it's important to show member states the amount of activists out there who care about these topics, right? We got to really up the ante on the advocacy. And we changed some things on the portal where people could use their own Zoom. So, anyway, so that it was easier for us to concentrate on advocacy, and we did. I have to say this year, the Ukraine war has made a huge dent and influenced our connection with the Bureau, and unfortunately and understandably, but we have actually made a dent in our negotiations with member states. I'm very proud of what our youth leaders did. There's the YLYP actually connection on our website. I'll try to get it and send you that direct link as well. Please join them because they are blowing my mind away with what they're able to achieve. It is truly amazing what's happening with that group, and they're partnering with the Global Youth, which is kind of sponsored by UN Women, but it's separate from them. We had an event this morning, and I don't know if anybody attended that. Please let me know if you did. And if you didn't attend, go to our YouTube channel and please please watch that 1 hour. It was so inspiring. I can't even begin to tell you. It just gives me energy to keep doing what I'm doing. And you could see how when given the mic, when given the opportunity, young people do have the answers, especially sometimes in rural areas. The last speaker was a young girl from, I think, Asia Pacific. And she ended up logging on very late. So she ended up speaking right before my closing statement, right after Latvia mission, who's the negotiator on the methods of work. So she was in between these, in her mind. I mean, I'm not that powerful, but the Latvia mission was powerful. And then the chair of NGO, she took that mic and just nailed it. And she was able to recommend specifically on climate justice. As some of you know, the topic this year is climate justice and gender in the intersection of gender, obviously. And it was just mind-blowing, the recommendations that she had, the examples that she brought. And it's a perfect example of why this intergenerational dialogue must be strengthened. So the other thing I wanted to share was the link to our handbook, so that you could see all the events. Even if you're not registered, there are events that you can, and a lot you can learn from our handbook itself on what we've been doing. I think I'm gonna stop here. I hope I didn't go over my allotted time, but if there's any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit. I do have an event at 6 o'clock, so I'm not gonna be able to stay for the whole time, but please, obviously message me directly, or ask questions in the chat, and I'll connect with you one-on-one.
Thank you so much, Hori. I think we didn't say at the beginning, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and at the end of the conference, we'll call on you to ask your questions. But if you have anything particularly for Hori right now, you can put it in the chat, and perhaps you can answer in the chat directly.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, thank you so much, Hori. I mean, as always, you're just, wonderful. I mean, all of your work and your activities and your energy and the different projects, and I mean, it's incredible. All the, the women and men around the world that you're able to really speak to and to talk to about our initiatives. And this year is particularly exciting because the focus is climate change. And we talk all the time about it. I talk about it all the time with people, but I realize how much do I really know about climate change? And so that's why I thought, well, for our conference this year, why don't I ask a woman scientist to tell us more about what is climate change? So now we're in for a real treat. We're going to hear from Dr. Maria Abate, and she's a fish and marine biologist and scientist. A little bit about her background. She had a bachelor's in zoology from University of California, Davis, and a PhD in biology from Northeastern. She's taught and conducted research at Wellesley, Simmons College, and now she's conducting research at Boston University. She's been involved in research projects around the world, University of West Indies in Jamaica, University of Hawaii, and also University in Venice. And one of the things I admire the most, because as you maybe know, I also write, and I write books. She just published an over 800-page book on the behavior, ecology, and evolution of cheetah fishes. And what are they? Well, I think we're more familiar with the fish tilapia, which we sometimes have eaten. Anyway, this is a very interesting, exciting book with, I think, 150 images. So, I mean, it's really something. If you want to find out more about the kind of work that Maria does, but also really related to one of our part of our mission at Fordham, she's helped many young women over the years. In her STEM professions, and I know also Hori, they're really interested in kind of really helping young women advance. And I think you've all done it in your own ways. And also, I just want to say, on a personal note, I'm very pleased that she was able to contribute a chapter entitled "Protecting Biodiversity: Why It Is Critical for Our Well-Being." And will be one of the chapters in my soon-to-be published Behavioral Science in the Global Arena, a Global Health Trends and Issues book, which hopefully will come out very soon. We know how our waters, ocean, and marine life are very threatened by climate change. So now, without further discussion, let me turn over the program to Dr. Abbate, who will help us understand more about what are we talking about when we talk about climate change, and what can we do to address it. So the program is yours. Go with it, Maria.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for that introduction. I'm so pleased to be with you all here today. And I really, what I'm hoping to do here is give an overview of what climate change is and what's causing it. And as you said, what we can do about it, or how we can act to do what we can do about this. So first of all, let me start off with this first slide here. And what you can see, you should be able to see, is you can see that there's a collage here. And this collage was created by NOAA.gov. And you may recognize it as various weather and climate related events. So for example, there are hurricanes here, heat waves are demonstrated by the sun. We have also flooding, drought. Also, we can see that glaciers are melting, and of course, fires. So when we look at this, we often think about, many of us may say, whoa, these are, related, this is climate change, this is global warming. And for many, these events are causing a lot of anxiety. And we call this climate anxiety, actually. That's what we're calling this now. And a new APA poll revealed that that was conducted last year, that Americans are increasingly anxious about climate change's impact on the planet. So over 50%, around 55% of Americans are concerned about what's going to happen with climate change, and it's affecting their mental health. They're worried. Now, this is also the case for young people. Here's a study that was published in the Lancet last year, where 10,000 young people were surveyed about how worried they were about climate change, and did it impact their daily lives. And so these 10 countries around the world, and there were 10,000 participants in the survey. And basically what they found is that on average, almost 60% of young people were worried about climate change, and almost 50% said it impacted their daily lives, this worry. And it was found that these worries were even more prevalent in countries where that were poorer nations. Or so, for example, in India and in Nigeria, around 70% of young people are worried about climate change and how it affects their daily lives. So, we know this, that young people can be very powerful, and these worries in part have, I think been very important in terms of mobilizing young people too around the world to act, right? So Greta Thunberg, she, as a young person, she started her protest in Sweden, which grew. So, this is a manifestation of this worry. And it's a good manifestation because hopefully people will act more. And also with respect to this, we know that, when we understand something, we might be a little bit more able to cope with it if we understand what's going on, and maybe we can then act. So you might be able to relate to this in terms of, when the engine light goes on in your car, okay? And if you're like me, who has a mechanic to help me out with my car, you have that disconcerted feeling, you know? So right now, we've definitely got an alarm that has gone off with our climate change. And right now we found that the last 7 years have been the highest temperatures on record in the world. And it's almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit higher than it's been the average before. So that's a big alarm. And people are certainly justified in being concerned because these weather events are increasing the exposures that people have to climate change in terms of air pollution and changes in diseases that are carried by insects, for example, increasing allergens, water quality impacts, water and food supply impacts, environmental degradation, extreme heat, severe weather. So there's a lot of exposures that people are dealing with. And this, of course, this has wide-ranging impact on their health. So all of these impacts on the physical and the physiological health, as well as just the stress that's created by these major environmental events are really very complex and multidimensional, it's predicted to be. So, you know, as an individual, there can be many things that people can be concerned with. There'll be stress, there'll be strains on social relationships. Substance abuse can become an issue, post-traumatic stress disorder if you're involved in some of those events that are such as hurricanes and floods, et cetera. And then the complexity of this extends to social interactions, of course. So again, understanding climate change can really maybe help us cope and act. So again, here is that alarm that's going off. So these last 7 years have been very hot since first recorded 142 years ago. And this is based on how high the temperature is compared to the average over 1951 to 1980. But it doesn't really matter where you average it. It comes out pretty much the same. The last 7 years have been extremely hot, almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 1 degree Celsius. So for today's talk, what I want to do really, now that I've introduced this aspect of concern, is, you know what, let's deal with this. We can deal with this a little bit better if we understand what's causing this climate change. And, you know, how might we cope with this daily climate stress? And I'm just going to give one example of how trees can help, how trees in the neighborhood can help. And third, what can we do? How can we act as individuals that will help us to decrease climate change? How can we all play a small role in this? So first of all, to understand what's going on with climate change, why the climate is changing, we need to learn about the greenhouse effect. So I want everybody to imagine that you're a ray of sunshine. Okay, you're each a ray of sunshine and you're traveling to the earth. Now, about half of us are going to make it to Earth. Okay, and there we're going to be this radiation, our ray of sunshine, is going to be absorbed by the oceans and land. But not all of it gets absorbed as heat. Some of it also ends up being reflected out back into space. Now, some of this heat's going to pass directly through the atmosphere, but most of it gets captured and retained by greenhouse gases. Now, these greenhouse gases are ultimately responsible for making this planet inhabitable when they're at normal levels. Okay. And what happens is these gases actually act like the glass walls of a greenhouse, and they hold heat in, and that's why we call them greenhouse gases. Now, without the greenhouse effect, the planet, the highest temperature might be around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the lowest could be under 0. So it's definitely having this moderately warm place has allowed life to evolve as it has. Now, these greenhouse gases that trap the heat include carbon dioxide, methane, water, ozone, and nitrous oxide. Now, for millennia, the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have been below this line, 300 parts per million. But around 1950, it started to increase exponentially, and it just keeps going up. So the greenhouse effect has become very great. And where is all of this CO2 coming from? It's from our burning of fossil fuels. That's where it's coming from. And this is getting, just like any of the other greenhouse gases that are naturally produced, these are getting trapped in our atmosphere and warming the planet. Now, I want to basically explain, why does the burning of fossil fuels produce these greenhouse gases? Why does it produce that? Well, because fossil fuels are actually remnants of fossil buried plants and animals that lived a long time ago. And they died and they were compressed under rock, and eventually they became oil, coal, and gas over millions of years. And this is actually a mine shaft here, and these are miners. This is in the early 1900s, and this is a fossil tree stump that is basically can be broken and used as coal. So this is really, when we're burning coal, we're burning mostly fossil plants. And when we're burning oil and gas, we're often burning fossilized animals and marine or other marine organisms. Now, since 2000, the global atmospheric carbon dioxide has grown 12%. That's a great deal. So you can see on this graph, the blue is showing the parts per million that has been present in the atmosphere since 1750, when these measurements were first being taken. And then also we have here how much we were emitting. And now we can see that right around 1900s, the exponential growth of what we were emitting really took off. Now, nature is basically struggling to keep up. And what's happening here is that as we release these carbon dioxide and other gases in excess, the forests can absorb some of them with photosynthesis, and the oceans can absorb some of them with diffusion, but we're dumping a lot more carbon dioxide in that's normally there. We're also putting methane and nitrous oxide in the air from our agriculture and livestock. And there's even fluorocarbon gases that hold heat in as well, and that comes from refrigeration, et cetera. So the forests and the oceans can't keep up with what we're putting there. If we weren't adding this stuff, we'd have a net zero effect, basically. So this is a matter of understanding stocks and flows. So the best way to think about this is, imagine your tub. Okay, you turn on the faucet really high, but your drain is really slow. So what's going to happen is this is the CO2 in the atmosphere. This is the extra CO2 we're putting into it. And our drain's going pretty slow because the forests and the oceans can uptake some, but not all of it. And so what's going to happen? The tub is going to keep filling. So our atmosphere keeps filling up with the heat that is being held in these greenhouse gases, and it's warming our planet and causing all sorts of climate change events. So one thing it's very important to remember is that as these gases are being created by us burning these fuels, it's really important to keep our forests intact. And because if we decrease our forests more, if we deforest large areas, then we don't have that place to absorb the carbon dioxide as it normally did. So that actually adds more to the emissions that we create. And plus, a lot of times the forests are burned. So that's also adding more CO2. So that, keeping trees is very important. And I want to make that point. But I also want to mention that trees, just as on a snapshot level, are very important for us to be able to cope with the daily stress of it getting hotter. So one way that we can do that, there's a lot of heat waves that have been going on, and they're increasing over time around the world. And people, of course, resort to the waters in the urban areas. But one thing that's really important is to plant some trees or keep the trees, because that naturally cools the surrounding area. How? Well, it creates shade, so there's less radiation there, there's less light there. And also evapotranspiration helps to cool the air around. So these photos are from Cambridge, Mass. And you can see here, less than 5% of the air surface here has trees in it, and the temperature is 98 Fahrenheit on this day, versus in this area, the trees make up 30% of the aerial height, and the temperature has declined by 8 here from that. So, being able to cope just on a daily basis in urban communities, having trees is a very important thing. And we can all help and encourage our local leaders to plant more trees, and our neighbors not to take down their trees. Okay, now, this atmosphere warming is not isolated from the planet, okay? What's happening is that the ocean is absorbing the heat as well. It's absorbing the carbon dioxide, which is bad, that acidifies it, but it also absorbs the heat. And so the global surface temperatures are going way up as well. And that is up to about, it depends which part of the ocean you're in, but it's gone up about 1 degree. And this is a real problem, because this is why we're having hurricanes. Become more forceful hurricanes, longer lasting hurricanes, larger hurricanes, because the heat that's stored in the ocean is the energy for the winds that create these big hurricanes. The other thing is that when water warms up, it expands. It expands in volume. So just that expansion from the heat is causing the oceans to rise. That's why sea level is going up. And of course, when there are storms, then you have more flooding, and islands are very susceptible to this situation. Then there are people who live on islands are very susceptible to this. So the ocean is warming up just from this, the volume increasing, but you have sea ice melting, you have Arctic ice melting, and you have other glacial and snow coverage melting. So that actively is increasing a lot more water in the ocean.
Maria, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I wonder if this fascinating presentation, is there any way you could just take 1 or 2 more minutes? Because I'm afraid we're running short of time.
Yeah,
Thank you
I'm
so
sorry. Yeah, I'm very sorry if I've gone over. So
Interesting.
I'm here, especially with all of this, all of the increased climate tragedies and increased temperature. We have the intergovernmental panel on climate change has made some recommendations. We really need to phase out our fossil fuels and rely on renewable energy for electricity. We really need to cut back our greenhouse gases. And acting, what can you do as an individual? Well, the UN has set up a website where it describes some specific things that you can do to cut down your own personal emissions. Saving energy, using public transport, etc., eating more vegetables and less meat, not having to cut it out, but just cut it down a little bit, throwing away less food, encouraging your leaders to take action. You can even measure your own carbon emissions with a calculator there that's very easy to use. So finally, in summary, and thanks for indulging me for the extra time, I hope that now we can understand a little bit more about climate change and it's being caused by excessive greenhouse gases, and that we can cope with our daily heat stress just in one way, a little bit, by keeping trees in our neighborhoods and acting. There's still time for us to do something about this, and we can do a little bit on our own part to change the amount of emissions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thanks for, that was wonderful, and I really feel now I can talk more when I say, well, I'm fighting against climate change. Now I feel I know and understand more of what I'm talking about. But now, without ado, let me turn the program over to Sandy Turner.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you for getting me on track here.
Okay, now I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Gabrielle Casper, with whom we've worked for many years in collaborating on conferences. It's got to be at least 7 or 8 years at this point, I think. Dr. Casper is the president of the International Health Awareness Network. She's the head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Notre Dame in Sydney, Australia. And she supervises a team of remarkable doctors, some of whom will be presenting their work this evening, who are engaged in groundbreaking initiatives fighting climate change in Australia, as well as providing health care to underserved populations all over the country who are most in need. Each year, Dr. Casper chooses some of her most talented and committed interns to present their work at our conference, and we look forward to hearing from them. I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Casper.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for your very kind words. For many years, I has shared events with Fordham due to the wonderful friendship of Sandy Turner, Elaine Congress, Sarosh Roshan, and also Vijay Milnik. And I really appreciate looking back at the original start of this. It has been an amazing event. This year, we're very honored to present. And the topic we're presenting on is climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster consequences for women's health. It's an extremely important topic we've got. And I'm not keen to do much hard work because it's my birthday today. So I think as it's my birthday, I shouldn't have to. So I've enlisted the assistance of Professor Lynn Madden, a public health physician and Professor of Population and Planetary Health at the School of Medicine, Sydney, University of Notre Dame, and also the wonderful medical students. Could all my speakers please unmute and just say hello so we can see your faces and you'll come to the front of the screen.
Good morning.
Happy birthday, Gay.
Happy birthday, Gay.
Okay, lovely young men and women, we'd really like to hear your talks. So can you unmute and let us begin with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Lily Davis, and this is Georgina Dowsett and Lily Claringbold. We are medical students from the University of Notre Dame, Australia. Ambitious climate change action yields enormous co-benefits for the public health of women and children. The effect of climate change on public health in general is well established. However, climate-sensitive health risks fall disproportionately on disadvantaged groups. The call today is to recognise the gendered health impact of climate change through discussing water security and natural disaster consequences, and to employ a rights-based approach in tackling this global crisis.
In most developing countries, women are intrinsically tied to water. They're responsible for collecting, storing, protecting, and distributing water. Addressing water scarcity means women are less susceptible to the physical toll of sourcing water via long journeys in situations of extreme heat, which causes fatigue, dehydration, and chronic malnutrition, as well as significant disabling musculoskeletal injury. A decreased work burden provides women with more time to engage in education and paid work. Empowering women by removing barriers to entering the workforce is essential. The World Economic Forum has found that in countries in the bottom 50% of gender equality, closing the gender workforce gap could increase GDP by an average of 35%. Women are physically impacted by poor water conditions more severely than their male counterparts, as they are often ensuring that their husband's needs are met before their own. Dehydration, consumption of contaminated water, and using unclean water for hygiene purposes poses unique threats to maternal health. Only 30% of all births in Tanzania took place in an environment deemed water and sanitation safe, which compounds the previously mentioned impact of unmet nutritional needs and heavy physical labour on maternal and perinatal health. Climate change is predicted to increase the risk and severity of diarrheal disease such as cholera. Thus, addressing water quality will result in improved pregnancy and neonatal outcomes.
Another example of the gendered effect of climate change on health is that natural disasters affect women more than men. A study reviewing the effects of natural disasters across 141 countries found that although natural disasters create hardships for everyone, on average, they kill more women than men, or kill women at a younger age than men. The same study highlighted that physical differences are very unlikely to explain differences in mortality. Socially constructed gender norms contribute to the vulnerability of women in natural disasters. For example, a norm such as dress codes may mean that women are unable to quickly and safely remove themselves from physical threats such as a cyclone, flood, or earthquake. A social expectation for modesty also prevents many women from learning to swim, which reduces survival in the context of a flood. Additionally, women and girls are expected to act as carers for those injured by natural disasters. Caring for family and loved ones means that women and girls are not generating income from other jobs, and combined with rising medical costs, this places them at a much higher risk of poverty, which, as we all know, is one of, if not the most important determinants of health.
In conclusion, women and children are well placed to benefit from addressing climate change. In doing so, we must ensure that we acknowledge the gendered dimension of the issue and respond sensitively. As a final message, in addressing the climate crisis and improving the health of women and children, we empower them to be agents of change, to channel activism, to contribute to meaningful discussions with decision-making bodies around topics affecting them. How can we expect women and children to have agency over their lives and global issues, such as climate change, if they cannot even access adequate health services from which they have been dispossessed due to long-standing social inequalities? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie and I'm joined by Patrick, and together we'll be discussing air pollution, climate change and the effects on health, in particular the health of children and women. According to the United Nations, climate change is one of the greatest global threats to our planet, affecting regions, islands, human settlements, human health and biodiversity. Over generations, it is brought on air pollution. Air pollution is tied to natural disasters, including landslides, floods, and hurricanes, and environmental deterioration, all which adversely affect women's health. Climate change disproportionately affects poorer developing countries and in turn women, as they represent 70% of people living in poverty. Moreover, women hold societal roles where they depend on land and natural resources to secure their families' livelihoods. These societal roles cause further social, economic, and political barriers that limit their working capacity and cause detrimental flow-on effects to their health outcomes. Women's gynecological and reproductive health are at risk due to food insecurity and poor hygiene, exacerbated by air pollution. Epidemiological studies have shown the direct impact of climate change on fertility, sexual health, and survival. As a result of this, women experience menstrual problems, urinary tract infections, and malnutrition. Further, Many studies have shown that air pollution exposure is tied to adverse pre-pregnancy, antenatal, and postnatal outcomes. The overarching effect of climate change on women's health results in higher risk of sexual violence, sexual exploitation, abuse, and trafficking. Thus, climate change and its effect on human populations is therefore not a general neutral event and further exacerbates gender inequality. Thank you.
Nearing the end of 2021, in response to a campaign which involved over 29,000 children to raise awareness regarding the significant health risks that air pollution poses, the United Nations acknowledged children's right to clean air. Currently, it's estimated that 9 in 10 children around the world are breathing toxins that surpass safe levels and which can interfere with critical stages of pediatric growth and organ development. The burden of disease associated with air pollution is highest in middle and low-income countries. Children in low-income countries and regions disproportionately suffer the effects of air pollution in households as poverty forces people to rely on polluting energy sources such as burning biomass, coal, kerosene to meet essential needs such as cooking, heating, and lighting. Air pollution can significantly affect children's health. There's a strong relationship between development and exacerbation of asthma, pneumonia, bronchitis, and other respiratory conditions. 8.5% of all new pediatric asthma cases reported in 2019 were attributed to nitrogen dioxide air pollutant, for example. The lung function of children living in polluted environments can be reduced by 20% into adulthood. And a child getting sick with respiratory infections often misses out on school, chances to socialise and develop, and this can manifest in various ways throughout life, limiting a child's capacity to fulfil their potential and further exacerbating the intergenerational cycles of poverty and disadvantage. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this important topic.
Hi, my name is Orchid Abar, and thank you for listening to my talk entitled Climate Change, Consequences on Maternal Health. Climate change threatens human health, including mental health and access to clean air, safe drinking water, nutritious food, and shelter. Everyone is affected by climate change at some point in their lives. According to the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change globally, one subgroup of women are particularly at risk: pregnant women. Most women have healthy pregnancies and, fortunately, healthy babies. However, climate change can worsen environmental hazards and therefore is a substantial threat to the health of pregnant women and increases health risks for the baby. Burning fossil fuels, for example, from power plants, cars, and trucks, produces carbon pollution that drives climate change and creates conventional air pollution, including particulate matter and ozone. More pollutants from automobiles, fossil fuel plants, and smoke from wildfires degrades air quality. This means at-risk populations, such as pregnant women and developing fetuses, are more likely to suffer from cardiac disease, respiratory disease, and put stress on mental health. Additionally, heat waves have always been a part of summer weather. However, because of climate change, heat waves have gotten hotter and longer across the globe and may also contribute to an increased risk of low birth weight. For the first time in the US, researchers found consistent evidence that pollution in the air and heat affects pregnancy outcomes, including stillbirth, low birth weight, and preterm delivery rates. This was published in a 2020 review that assessed more than 32 million US births and was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Microscopic air pollutants have the ability to go deep into a mother's lungs, threatening her pulmonary health. Pollutants can cross into the placenta, leading to inflammation that can cause gestational diabetes or preeclampsia. Extreme heat can stress the mother and trigger reactions from dizziness to cardiac arrest. This review also confirmed that mothers most threatened are those with asthma and minorities, like especially Black women. The State of Global Air 2020 report found that air pollution accounts for up to 20% of newborn deaths worldwide. That's almost 500,000 infant deaths in 2019, most related to complications of low birth weight and preterm birth. A study in China also found that breathing higher levels of particulate matter is associated with higher likelihood of infertility. A 2020 Harvard study found a link between gestational diabetes and extreme heat. This summer, the American College of OBGYN issued guidance on the link between extreme temperatures and irregular birth outcomes. Under a changing climate, hurricane intensity and rainfall are expected to increase, and floods may occur more often or be more severe. These types of extreme weather events increase health risks to pregnant women. Poor nutrition and diarrhea from contaminated water or food have been linked to negative birth outcomes, such as low birth weight. Floods can lead to an increase in exposure to toxins and mold. Severe weather events may damage homes, other buildings, and roads, or require evacuations, which can make it more difficult for pregnant women to get the specialized health care they need. Physical outcomes related to environmental hazards are not the only concern for pregnant women. Pregnant women and women who have recently given birth are at an increased risk for severe stress and other negative mental health outcomes due to weather-related disasters associated with climate change, such as postpartum depression. Climate threats only exacerbate the pre-existing maternal health crisis in the world, and yet few people know about the danger. There is more public information about protecting pets from extreme heat than there is about pregnant women, according to the most recent Human Rights Watch review of 105 official heat safety web pages, climate action plans, and sustainability initiatives for 18 major U.S. cities, including the 15 most populous, totaling 32 million people. Reductions in fossil fuel use can decrease carbon pollution and conventional air pollution that poses health risks to both mothers and babies in developed and developing countries alike. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Isabella Tan and I'm a first-year student studying Commerce Law at UNSW.
My name is Charlotte Tan and I'm a Year 11 student at North Sydney Girls High School.
My name is Indigo Kite and I'm a first-year Human Biology student at ANU. Undeniably, one of the greatest crises in the present and future is climate change, in all corners of the planet, in environment, healthcare, and human rights. Yet disproportionately, the impact upon girls is the greatest, especially from those of the most vulnerable and poor communities.
Today, Charlotte, Indy, and I are going to reveal just how greatly environmental issues disproportionately affect women. As your future generation, we must make change through recognition of the crises in leadership and education.
According to the Plan International Position Paper on Climate Change, less than 2% of climate strategies mention girls, and only 34% of national climate policies are child-sensitive. This is alarming because trends show correlations between the effect of climate change and gender equality. The United Nations Children's Fund describes climate change as a social and intergenerational injustice.
When faced with impacts of the climate crisis, one of the first things families sacrifice is the education of young girls to assist their families domestically and financially. The Malala Fund estimates that the climate events of 2021 will prevent at least 4 million girls, predominantly from developing countries, from completing their education. Similarly, a new report from the NGO Plan International shows that if current trends continue, by 2025, climate change will be a contributing factor in preventing at least 12.5 million girls each year from completing their education. This has lasting impacts on the mental health of young girls, especially in developing areas whereby social and cultural stigma around mental health limits access to services. We cannot afford to sacrifice the education of young women who have proven to be key drivers in finding climate solutions.
Moreover, the emergence of a generation of child brides is a growing crisis and direct impact of climate change, as agriculture industries such as fishing and wheat collapse due to rising temperatures, causing families to sell their daughters to make profit. Across the whole of Africa, UNICEF warned in 2015 that the total number of child brides could more than double to 310 million by 2050 if current trends continue. In Malawi, Mac Bain Makandawaya, Executive Director of YouthNet and Counseling, quotes shocking figures. Given that there are about 4 or 5 million girls at risk of getting married in Malawi, around 1.5 million girls are at risk of getting married because of climate change-related events. The climate crisis is an insurmountable threat against the autonomy of women.
Finally, an analysis of 130 peer-reviewed studies finds that women often face higher health risks from the impact of climate change when compared to men. In drought-stricken areas such as North Africa, women are reported to be 12 times more likely to suffer from malnutrition and 8 times more likely to be iron deficient. Moreover, in areas affected by rising sea levels such as Mumbai, 55% of the city's population live in alternative housing arrangements. And according to UN Women, more than half of slum populations are women between the ages of 15 to 49. Young women and girls tend to undertake most domestic chores in slums, such as collecting water from contaminated sources, causing a disproportionate exposure to slum-bred diseases.
Climate change is the most significant intergenerational issue of our time, being identified as the biggest global health threat of the 21st century.
The inequality and discrimination experienced by marginalized women and future generations will only be amplified if we as a society do not act now.
To end, we quote feminist activist Greta Thunberg. "I don't want you to feel hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day. And then I want you to act."
Thank you for listening to our presentation.
Hi, I'm Steph. This is Jess. We're third year medical students at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. Our topic is exploring global trends and interventions to address gender-based violence in post-disaster contexts. We know by now that natural disasters are increasing globally, and climate change driven by human activity has a significant role to play. We also know that 1 in 3 women have experienced physical and/or sexual violence globally, according to the World Health Organization. We're looking at the intersection of these two issues. According to the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, women and girls bear a disproportionate burden of disaster-related impacts, including increased mortality rates and being disproportionately affected by loss of livelihoods and reduced access to healthcare and education. Among this, there's growing evidence to suggest that violence against women and girls increases during and post natural disaster.
Last year, Alyssa Thurston and colleagues published a systematic review exploring the global data on this issue. It is one of the first global systematic reviews on this relationship between natural disasters and increased violence against women and children. The authors identified 3 hypothesized pathways. They are that disaster exposure is associated with an increase of stresses that trigger violence, including economic and housing insecurity, and increased mental health issues, an increase of enabling environments, and a reduction in law enforcement, and an exacerbation of underlying drivers. We can now use the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria, Australia, as a case study for these pathways. Following this event, there was a rise in domestic and family-related violence. Firstly, some women were forced back into abusive situations in both the short and long term, leaving them more vulnerable. Secondly, the immediate crisis response was to property and safety, which left few resources for family violence. And thirdly, the widespread trauma, homelessness, unemployment, and substance use were characteristic of the recovery period and contributed to an increase of incidences of violence against women and children.
Using the Black Saturday bushfires example, we can see numerous opportunities for interventions to address violence against women and girls in post-disaster contexts. Importantly, we need gender-sensitive risk reduction policies that include women in disaster response at all levels. Alongside this, we need strengthened collaborations between disaster management, law enforcement, and health authorities. It's important to acknowledge that programs to address violence have been extensively trialled and documented over the past decade in many countries around the world, and applying these to natural disaster contexts may be beneficial. Primarily, these interventions include economic empowerment for both men and women, engaging men and boys in programs that promote challenging power dynamics and social norms. A growing area of research now will be testing the application of these interventions in a climate disaster context. Thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing the rest of the talks.
Hello, I'm Lynn Madden, and I'm Professor of Population and Planetary Health at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. I'm going to be speaking to you about preparing the health professions to respond to the health effects of climate change. Women account for 70% of the global health and social care workforce. This represents a major opportunity to mobilise women to strengthen the environmental sustainability of the sector. However, graduates of health professions education entering the workforce are generally poorly prepared to contribute to environmental sustainability, and currently the capacity of health systems to respond is in part being limited by the understanding of their workforces. Tertiary education must step up and better prepare graduates for this role. First, I describe the work of a collaboration of medical schools in Australia and New Zealand who have worked together to strengthen environmental sustainability within medical programs in both countries. Second, I examine how we've included environmental sustainability in a new Masters of Public Health program offered by UNDA. Accreditation standards for medical programs in Australia and New Zealand are currently silent on the environment as a determinant of health. Consequently, a collaboration of medical schools has developed graduate outcome statements and learning objectives for schools to use when reviewing their curricula. 5 areas of learning were determined that medical students should know about, and these are listed on this slide. The existing graduate outcome statements of the Australian Medical Council were then mapped against these areas and amendments suggested. Learning objectives were identified from the literature or developed by the collaboration. The result was circulated to all medical schools and has been published this month in the Medical Journal of Australia, open access to allow wide sharing. This is an example of how health professions programs across universities can support each other to resource and achieve change. However, for change to be achieved at scale, these themes must be included into accreditation standards across all the health professions. This is a multidisciplinary endeavour. Postgraduate public health education also needs to change. A skilled public health workforce is essential for the response to climate change. At UNDA, we have launched a new Master of Public and Environmentally Sustainable Health. This will cover conventional MPH learning, such as epidemiology and communicable disease control, but also acknowledges new areas of competency, such as systems thinking, to help people engage with the complexity of public health programs. We've introduced new innovative courses, such as environmental sustainability in healthcare systems, and expanded existing areas, such as communicable disease control, to include One Health. Throughout, we recognise the importance of cultural competence to enable graduates to work more effectively with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for better health outcomes for everyone. A recent review of the content of MPH programs in Australia has identified sustainability, the SDGs, One Health and systems thinking as new areas for inclusion. We are very pleased to see this external validation of our approach. The recent IPCC reports again remind us that there's a closing window of time to take action to mitigate climate change to avoid the worst outcomes. I ask educators, how can you strengthen your programs to include environmental sustainability? I encourage students to demand more, to prepare you for the health effects of climate change, environmental degradation and disaster. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely video, and so great to hear from everybody. So our next speaker has won numerous awards, among them the 2016 International Children's Peace Prize, and is the United Nations Human Rights Champion. She founded Green Hope Foundation, an ECOSOC accredited youth-led not-for-profit organization in Canada that is now operating in 26 countries at just 12 years old. It is such an honor to have her speak with us today. Let's welcome Kekashan Basu.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you today, sharing this virtual space with all of you and just hearing from all of the very powerful women and girl leaders who have been able to bring about so much change in this world to create this better place for everyone. So this is a topic that is very close to my heart because we at Green Hope Foundation recognize how important it is to use the feminist lens in every single action that we take, and particularly the intersectional feminist lens, recognizing the unique challenges that every single woman and girl in all of our diversity, what we face now in the face of climate change. And today I will be speaking to you a bit about what we as Green Hope Foundation do in our own small way to bring about that change and highlight the work that our women and girls are doing all across the world. Now, we all know how we are probably living in the most trying times right now in living memory. And as the world slowly comes out of this pandemic, we have heard the phrase building back better a lot. It's become this buzzword. And I find this to be quite out of place, especially given the communities and regions that my team and I work in, because these are places in the world's most marginalized communities. They're rural communities in the least developed countries and without any form of social care or basic infrastructure. That's never existed. So how can you build back to something that never existed before? And why would you want to put these hapless souls back in their misery from which they struggle each day to come out of? So what we at Green Hope Foundation understand is that we need a drastic change in our mindset and in our actions so that we're truly able to bring about change at the ground level. And with this existential threat of climate change, like all of our previous panelists have highlighted, disproportionately impact women and girls more, it is extremely important that we recognize how women and girls and all of our diversity are impacted,
and then recognize the leadership role that they've taken on forever, really, to create this better world for everyone. And that is exactly our work at Green Hope Foundation, to make sure that we're able to create this balance where women and girls are no longer left behind in the sustainable development process. We all know how we're currently living in this age of the Anthropocene, and we know what the tremendous impacts how climate change is really just destroying our world. But it also has this very big social impact as well. And of course, this environmental and social injustice is directed to our women and girls. And it's not just one challenge that women and girls face, is one global challenge. It is very, very unique to every single part of the world. So that is why, for me, when I founded Green Hope Foundation as a 12-year-old girl and as a young woman of color, it was extremely important for me to create an organization where we addressed all of these unique challenges, where we were able to recognize and act upon these intersectionalities, all of these interconnections with other issues, literally all across the sustainable development goals, so that we are able to create a more sustainable world for all that is climate just. And our work focuses primarily on ensuring this feminist sustainable development, feminist climate justice. And we are a 99% women-run organization. And that was completely unintentional, but we have seen how women and girls, whether it's in the most vulnerable communities, whether it's in urban areas, how they are the ones who have taken on this leadership role to bring about change. So what do we do at Green Hope Foundation to bring about this global change and ensure feminist sustainable development? So we have seen, obviously, what these challenges are on the ground. One of the first things that we noticed is that it's very important for us to recognize how women and girls lose their sources of income. And, we've heard a lot of talk surrounding that, but we've not really seen a lot of ground level initiatives that ensure that women and girls are actually able to have the skill sets to contribute to a circular economy and have the power to do so as well. So we have started a sewing school in many of the climate vulnerable rural communities that we work in. And this has enabled the women and girls to finally generate a stable source of income. And one time someone had told us that they don't go towards teaching women sewing skills, they go towards coding. And that is extremely important. But what is important to also understand is that a lot of these very climate vulnerable areas, they're also extremely conservative, such as some of the ones that we work in where we've started these sewing schools. And if we came up to them and said that we want to start a school for coding for the women and girls just directly, it would be rejected. What we then realized is that it's important for us to understand their cultures and customs, understand that ensuring gender equality would take time, but it's important to take that first step. And that is why we employed sewing as a way that was accepted by the society. And slowly and steadily, we were able to move towards ensuring that these women and girls had the stable source of income, and gradually moved towards them having other sources of income as well. For instance, through farming. Now, obviously, through climate change, it has affected the rights, the land rights of women and girls. Of course, all around the world, women and girls do not have the requisite land rights in order to really bring about that change in their own zones of influence. But we recognize how important women and girls are, how important the oral knowledge that has been passed down for generations, how important that is to maintaining sustainable communities through farming. So we provide organic farming training to these women and girls. Many of the villages that we work in, the men have actually had to migrate right at the onset of the climate change induced disasters. And it's really been left to the women and girls to manage the villages. So we train them in organic farming. We have even now, with the training that we've done for the women there, they've started their own organic garden where they grow all of their vegetables. This is our work in Bangladesh. And yeah, it's just so amazing to see how they are in their own zones of influence bringing about that change. And we have also seen how important it is to bring in technology as well, solar technology, to bridge this gap. So we have instituted and installed solar-powered irrigation systems in several rural communities that we work in. And this has actually enabled the women and girls, it just made it easier for them to work in the fields and to have a source of water, especially in those climate vulnerable areas. The other thing that we realized is that during the pandemic and in those very climate vulnerable areas, there was this huge digital divide. We all saw how our learning systems just went online, and we have all of these discussions about how online schooling or hybrid learning might continue well into the future. But what we didn't take into account is that there is a very big digital divide that still exists, because we have digital dividends that coexist with digital divides. And of course, women and girls are the ones most affected by this. So we have installed routers in the villages that we work in to ensure that our ambassadors can connect to online learning, and they can connect to our webinars as well, where we then provide them with the climate resilience education. What we also saw is that there was an extremely high rate of girls, especially dropping out of school, not just during the pandemic, but also as a result of climate change induced disasters. Now we realized that we would need to find a way to tackle this. So we have our solar powered mobile libraries now that are a climate smart way of providing education and literacy skills to children, especially girls who've been forced to drop out of school. This mobile library currently is reaching out to over 300,000 children across Asia and Africa, and bringing the books directly to their doorstep. And not just books, but also stationery items. And as you can see in the bottom right image, our members also conduct reading corners where they help the children with their homework, with their learning, with their literacy skills. And it's just wonderful to see how receptive the children, the girls, are to this. We also ensure that environmental education and feminist climate justice is something that is taught in schools as well, in urban environments where there is formal education. Now at Green Hope Foundation, the core of our work is education for sustainable development. So that is why we use this as a transformative tool to bring about change everywhere. So of course, we want to ensure that children in urban communities also are aware of how women and girls are affected most by climate change induced disasters. So we do this by partnering with various school boards. So for instance, in my city, in Toronto, we are partnered with the Toronto District School Board. We are partnered with Dubai's Education Board, Suriname's Youth Parliament. And in this way, we are able to see how children are taught right from their childhood about why climate literacy is important, what is happening with our world, and how it's not just this looking at the carbon levels and trends. It is also about recognizing the very human impact that is on women and girls. I spoke earlier about us employing solar technology, and this other trend that we noticed in the rural communities that we work in is that when climate change induced disasters hit, or in climate vulnerable areas, in the evenings, the women never thought it was safe to go out of their homes because there was no electricity at all. So we have installed solar street lights in several of the communities that we work in. And this actually enables the women and girls to finally have the freedom
and the safety to come out of their homes at night. This right here is in Liberia. And this is something that is not usually addressed in the general discourses that we see surrounding climate change or even feminist climate change. But for us, it's really important to recognize how even a lack of electricity, how that is exacerbated when climate change and these disasters hit. And of course, we have our IT and STEM and computer literacy skills trainings as well. So we do provide lessons on coding and computer literacy in areas in rural communities where we know it is safe for the women and girls to do so. And it is just so wonderful to see how receptive the children are, how receptive the girls are. And we're happy to say that the graduates from our training programs now have good jobs in both the rural and urban areas. And that is helping their entire community, uplifting their entire community because their women and girls are educated. We also saw during the pandemic, but just in climate change and these disasters, post-climate change and these disasters as well, how there is an increase in the lack of access to clean water and sanitation for women and girls. Because in a lot of the communities that we work in, women don't even have access to a toilet. Like they are expected to go out into the fields to relieve themselves. That exposes their risk of sexual assault, of harassment, trafficking, abuse. And we have built toilets in several of these villages for the women and girls so that they have that safe space there, and not just in the homes, but also in schools where we provide them with climate resilience education. We'd seen how many of the girls felt it was unsafe to come to school because they didn't have a toilet there. So by providing that toilet there, it was just a simple way of ensuring that the girls felt safe coming to school to get that climate literacy education. We've also built deep bore tube wells to ensure access to clean water. And finally, we understand how important it is for us to just adopt that intersectional feminist lens in all the work that we do. There is so much that is going on in our world right now, and we know how women and girls are affected disproportionately by climate change. But sadly, there is still very little action, concrete ground level actions that are being taken to bring about change. And that is what we do at Green Hope Foundation to change this narrative so that we are really able to break this bias, finally advance the role of women in sustainability and recognize what they're already doing so that we are able to create a just, equitable, and sustainable world for all. And for myself, as a young woman and as a young woman of color, I firmly believe that this is the last generation that is there to bring about, that has the opportunity to change the status quo before it is too late. So it's time for us to draw on our common humanity, our intergenerational solidarity, and recognize how women and girls and all of our diversity are leaders in ensuring feminist climate justice all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kekashan. That was so inspiring, and I love the way that you've empowered so many amazing women. I am going to introduce our next speaker, who basically founded a school for children along with the co-founders, and it is something that helps children that wouldn't normally go to school. They pay for their education with recycled plastic, and coming after everything you've said, it seems very, very similar, but I hope you enjoy the video. So I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Parmita Sarma, who's going to speak on the video. It's 3 o'clock in the morning in India, otherwise they would be here in person, but this is to help with the time difference.
At Akshar, we have created a new low-cost education model that has caught the attention of the world. A new kind of school where social problems and community development become part of curriculum and daily school work. At Akshar Foundation, we have created such a school in Guwahati, in Assam, called Akshar Forum. At Akshar Forum, students, of course, learn the traditional school subjects, languages, mathematics, sciences, but they also work in the school. Primarily, they work as teachers for the younger students of the school. They work building furniture for the school, growing food for the school, planting trees and beautifying the landscape of the school, caring for the stray animals around the school, cleaning and maintaining the solar power plant of the school, printing worksheets for school, among other jobs. They quit their manual labor jobs and every day they come to school. At Akshar Forum, students don't pay school fees with money. Instead, they pay with used plastic. The students' parents are required to send in all of the household plastic for recycling. If they don't send the plastic, they can of course choose to pay some fees in cash. But so far, no one has chosen that option. Because of this single aspect of our school, small though it was, news of our school went viral around the world. Now, each student brings in about 25 pieces of plastic every week, and the school collects about 10,000 units each month. More importantly, we have instilled a new habit in these families who used to toss or burn plastic to segregate cleaned plastic instead. This was a fundamental change in their behavior, something which can be quite difficult for NGOs or even for the governments to achieve. This picture was on Forbes, Time, BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, and in local news outlets of almost every country. We were shocked. How could news of a small school in a village in northeast India make the entire globe take notice? How the World Economic Forum was sharing their article about Akshar every 2 weeks for the better part of a year. But now I know why this story spread around the world. This picture represents a paradigm shift, a fundamental change in the way we see children. Instead of passive victims, waiting for politicians, policymakers of powers that be, children can be trained to tackle the problems of the world head on. It gives us some hope that the next generation can overcome the nightmare scenarios that they have coming, from diseases to climate change disasters. People shared the story because they want to see more schools taking these steps. They want to see schools evolve into something new. If all the children of the future start doing things like this in school, they can make a huge difference and get a great education in the process. That is our dream. That is our goal in building our model school. We think that all those children in poverty around the world can be the ones to save the world if schools evolve and adopt a simple new policy. Schools need to employ child laborers. Too many children today drop out of school to perform casual or manual labor. They need jobs. They need income. They need money to eat and clothe themselves. So let us employ them as private teachers for younger children. Employ them to grade tests and quizzes. Employ them to print worksheets and take attendance. We like to say, a teenager with a tablet is a powerful teacher. When we first started the school, most of the older students had dropped out of the primary school many years earlier. Girls were kept at home to do household work or sometimes sent off to serve other families. Kids who were lucky enough to have parents, the families expect them to be housekeepers or breadwinners by the time they become teenagers. So we told the parents, send your daughters and sons to school instead of manual labor, and they will earn money at school. And they started coming. We got dropouts back into the school, attending on time every single day, and convinced them to abandon dangerous manual labor. In this new education model, which we call meta teaching, adults teach older children how to teach and transform them into their teaching assistants. This way, every young student has daily private lessons from an older, caring, and paid student under the direct supervision of adult teachers. That one-on-one attention is the key to their growth. The hope is to replace the role that an educated parent would serve at home in middle or upper class family. The lucky ones have supportive, educated families at home, giving daily encouragement, helping them with homework at night, sending them to private coaching, and threatening grave consequences for failure. With this new model, we can make sure children stay at school and make sure every child has someone paying personal attention to their learning every single day. They earn extra money by teaching for 1 or 2 hours during the school day. Then on top of that, they earn extra pocket money after school by tutoring younger siblings at home, taking attendance, grading tests and homework, printing worksheets for the classes, teaching art, stitching and embroidery, recycling waste plastic into bricks, construction using the plastic bricks and cement, healing stray puppies in the school shelter and preparing them for adoption, landscaping and farming, and building furniture. They have had some first aid training by treating the maladies of stray puppies, and now we are fundraising for a small school health clinic where these two and the classmates will learn to measure blood pressure, administer CPR, clean and dress the wounds, and give basic first aid to the parents and the neighbors in the community. Some of them will become doctors, but probably most of them will be groomed as nurses, as technicians, as hospital orderlies, ambulance technicians. And aren't these also important to society? All these positions should be held by well-educated Indians. The last video I will show you is of Kumari sisters. Each sibling is coached by the elders every day at home.
Somebody who fixed it. June tik naha fix kore he bhal kore he ki kore dentist. Itu ki hai? Mother. Mother. Mother mane koi ho? Ma. Ma likha. S and ox. Ox to kan kaha? Straw. Your hand has 5. Tumar hatat 5টা কি আছে? Fingers. F I N.
Now the youngest sister, the child of a snack cart vendor, can read better than private school kids her age. This accumulation of teachers, of skilled instructors, of coaches, with an exponential growth model, this is how we can achieve the goal of 1 billion educated in India. If school systems evolve, then maybe the next generation can heal the environment and break the cycle of poverty. And finally, achieve universal education. If schools evolve, we can ensure that this generation is equipped with the skills they need to overcome the coming crisis. We can teach them how to save the world. Please join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hallie, for bringing in such an inspirational speaker. I am very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is going to be Dr. Patricia Brownell. She is an associate professor emeritus at the Fordham Graduate School of Social Service. She is an expert in preventing elder abuse and the rights of older women. And because of that, she served as the president of many important organizations and also as a consultant to the United Nations. She's going to show a brief video and also speak on the importance of women and social workers serving in the government.
Thanks so much, Cece, and hello, everyone. We're taking a pause in our program today to celebrate women world leaders. And we're going to have a short video that Cece you'll introduce, but I also have a few slides just to start a conversation about what are some of the special qualities that women bring to the world stage. And I'm going to go through this very quickly so we can get to the video. And I think that the video, the PowerPoint is loaded. There we go. Thank you. So the question is, what's the value added of women on the world stage? And I'm going to just ask that the next slide be shown. So women in leadership roles is more important than ever. More women are being elected to the legislatures around the world. And we know from the wonderful presentations we've had today that the survival of the planet requires new thinking and strategies. And ultimately, the problems we face are not so much technological as human problems. And some of these are decision makers. Next slide. So there's a concept now that was actually developed by some of the faculty, the women faculty affiliated with the Institute for Women and Girls at the Fordham Graduate School of Social Service, called Caring Justice. And the global public health and safety, as it's reflected in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are SDG 16, means promoting justice, just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. And among the authors of an important chapter on this are Tina Mashi, Smita Dewan, Sandy Turney, who is with us today, Dr. Turner, and some other authors. And they suggest that a caring justice approach to governance is reflects a core principle of care and justice, and it's aligned with a human rights framework exemplified by many female leaders promoting today gender equality and family and community-friendly policies. Next slide, please. So what are some of the traits that make women great global leaders? And from the Pew Research Center study, some of the traits that women bring to leadership roles are empathy. Women leaders are found to be empathic and have strong interpersonal skills. Communication. Women leaders are strong communicators and demonstrate effective leadership in cross-cultural communication. Listening skills. Women listen, ask questions, and share thoughts. And these skills are shared and appreciated across cultures and with people from diverse backgrounds. Collaboration skills. Women enjoy learning new perspectives and coming up with solutions together. And finally, learning. Women enjoy learning each other's perspectives and looking at problems from different perspectives. Next slide, please. So what are some of the women's leadership traits that reflect social work values? And there's a social worker in New York City, Ruth Messinger, who some of you might know, some of us know very well, who is also a past Manhattan Borough president. And she's quoted as saying, people think law is the best preparation for political leadership. And of course, it's an excellent preparation, but so is social work. She says that traits that make good leaders are also reflected in social work values and principles, and skills for global leaderships are those taught by social work educational programs. Next slide, please. So a couple of examples of women who lead countries and also promote human rights in other venues. Michelle Bachelet, she's a medical doctor and a pediatrician. She served 2 terms as president of Chile, also served as the first executive director of UN Women, and is currently the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights. Another example is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is Africa's first democratically elected women president. This is of Liberia, and she won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work to empower women. Next slide, please. So women are leading countries in greater number than ever before. The United States, in fact, has its first women and first Black woman as vice president. And this is a double achievement. And Fordham University has its first woman president. So let's celebrate. And this leads us to our video. Thanks, Cece. I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, so we have just a brief video. It is a few years old, but it just shows some women serving in important leadership roles around the globe.
Thank you very much to both Pat and Cece. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my Fordham MSW colleague, UN intern colleague, and IFSW intern, Linda Levin, to speak about disaster preparedness.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the introduction, and I know we're running behind schedule, so I will try to make this really quickly because I am nothing but a team player. So the planning team, since we were doing this presentation, felt that I would be good to present during this presentation today, because I am leading kind of disaster preparedness work on my borough of Staten Island. And so my presentation today is kind of just going to focus on the 4 C's of disaster preparedness and how a community emergency network kind of has balanced both community preparedness for climate issues and response during a global pandemic. So really quickly about Staten Island, it is the southernmost tip of New York. We're all the way down there. If you see on the top right-hand side is a little red dot, that is Staten Island. We are one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, and we have a population just under 500,000 people, even though we are the only borough in New York City to grow in population according to the census. I think it's also important to mention that on Staten Island, even though there are 11 public hospitals all over New York City, there are none on Staten Island. So we do not have a public hospital. When you think about resources and how that gets divided, we don't get it our fair share. So if you ever heard of the Forgotten Borough, that kind of is us. And while there's 62 hospitals in all of New York City, acute hospitals, so there's some are small, there's only 2 hospitals on Staten Island. So 500,000 people, only 2 hospitals, just think of that. And that's important for my presentation. So kind of the work that I do. So I work for the Staten Island Not-for-Profit Association, and I would do communications, and we're a capacity building organization for nonprofits. So we have over about 200 members from all different sectors of community work and nonprofits. And we also manage the Staten Island Community Organizations Active in Disaster. So a COAD is just kind of something very simple, and what you've kind of seen everywhere. It's a national thing, it's probably internationally known. And it's just an organization, whether it's in just a geographical location or a community, and it's composed of different representatives from the public, private, and nonprofit agencies. So my COAD is just for Staten Island, obviously, but what makes my COAD different is that we have the medical ecosystem. So usually, and there's other COADs in New York City, there's Bronx, there's East Harlem. I know there's one in Brooklyn, I can't even think of the name, that's really popular. But our medical ecosystem is actually really important and really different for our COAD. And our medical ecosystem includes our hospitals, our nursing home, our dialysis centers, group homes, rehabs, and our pharmacies. And that has been and proven to be completely instrumental during the pandemic. Because one thing with disaster preparedness is you're not actually just doing one disaster at a time. There's multiple things that happen. And I can speak about that more and why that was made a big difference. But in disaster preparedness, there is a cycle of what you do. And so it starts with mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And my organization, and it's a continuous cycle. You're constantly doing trainings, you're exercising, to see, making sure people know what they need to do. You're evaluating the progress of what happened. You're changing and doing any corrective action you need to make sure that you basically have effective coordination when you actually have to respond to a disaster. And I'll kind of go through and why that's important. But for the most part, a COAD normally just focuses on mitigation, preparedness, and response. Over the past 2 years through the pandemic, we've kind of moved a little bit between response and recovery. While we're not necessarily the people on the ground, we have been doing a lot of the organizing behind the scenes for the people on the ground, and that kind of moves into the recovery stage. And like I said, it's part of a bigger kind of cycle, because disaster is not just it's natural disasters, it's acts of terrorism, it's man-made disasters, it's climate problems. And one thing I didn't mention, if you haven't heard of COAD, you may have heard of VOAD, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. They're kind of used a little interchangeably. But what you see with like the evaluating and the exercising and other disasters that we kind of have worked on, and most people work on, is obviously the active shooter drills, the blood emergencies, which right now New York is in a blood emergency, so please go donate blood. COVID-19 obviously was a big one, which was important because we had the medical ecosystem, and and then obviously weather-related emergencies. So I made this presentation specifically about Hurricane Ida, because obviously we're talking about climate justice issues, but that it kind of is all things. So one thing I've noticed through disaster preparedness is you're never kind of focusing on one problem, you're doing multiple problems. And so it's never an either or problem or a situation or answer, it's always this and. So it was, I was doing Hurricane Ida, and I was doing COVID-19 work, and I was doing making sure people were getting blood drives and doing blood. So it's constantly multiple things at the same time. So specifically for New York, we are very, very prone to flooding vulnerabilities. We're very prone in New York City to flooding. These are the 4 areas in New York City, and there's multiple resources I can drop into the chat later on. But the 4 areas in New York City, and this is all of New York City, that we are prone to getting is tidal flooding, coastal flooding, inland flooding, and ravine flooding. So if you were here just a few months ago for Hurricane Ida, you probably know that we had inland flooding and ravine flooding, and that affected New York. Hurricane Sandy kind of had a bit of everything, tidal flooding, inland flooding, and especially ravine flooding. So since I'm talking specifically about Hurricane Ida, I wanted to also show you that as a co-op, we kind of work together with not only other community organizations, but we also work with the city, the state, and federal organizations to make sure that we're getting all the resources needed. So right now, this is the New York City Emergency Management Evacuation Zones, and this was updated just last year, about in July of 2021. And I think it's important to notice that in all of New York City, so this is only specifically to Staten Island, since this is the work that I can only speak to, but right now in New York City, 3 million people actually live in zones. So you'll see on the top right-hand side, there's red to blue or teal, and those are the different zones that people can live in. And right now, 3 million people in New York City live within these 6 different zones. So if they need to evacuate, this increased by 1 million people just since Hurricane Sandy. For Staten Island, which is the map on the left-hand side from New York City Emergency Management, these are our evacuation zones. I think it's important to notice, so this is increased since Hurricane Sandy, but I think it's important to notice that the borough is only 7.3 miles wide, and just from the red zone on the bottom part of Staten Island, just from the red zone all the way up to the zone 5, right up here, that's 2.3 miles, or about 2 miles right there. So that's almost half the island, and that's not even including the other half. So just think about how there's not that much room in the middle. And this is specifically about Hurricane Ida now. I want you to see that when you look at when we just had this disaster, Staten Island was disproportionately affected. We also were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. If I had that data, I can show you that as well. We had the highest rate of infection through the whole entire pandemic, including now, and we also have the lowest vaccination rates, and that's a multitude of issues. Like I said, disaster is everything. So New York City was definitely not alone from experiencing disaster problems, or from Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida kind of affected all of the Northeast and especially the East Coast. I believe New York, the tri-state area, had about 40 deaths during Hurricane Ida. Staten Island specifically had 9 inches of rain. And we're already an island, so geographically we're kind of further from the rest of the city, so that also affects our resources and what we have on the island. We're constantly doing hazard vulnerability analysis, and that, evaluating and seeing what we need. Specifically, so Governor Hochul, right now, if you know, Staten Island is considered Richmond County, not Staten Island, but that's our county. We were considered a state of emergency so that we can get resources here faster. And during the Hurricane Ida, one of our hospitals actually went completely underwater, and we had no emergency room and no access to the emergency room. So it was really important for the FDNY to be able to kind of help that, because we needed to redirect everyone getting to the hospital when there was emergencies, because there was a big commotion on the day of Hurricane Ida. So that was kind of a different problem. The data kind of from here, you can see, is that it kind of goes by 311 calls and DOE flood reports, the Department of Environmental Protection, and just all this different data to see, and that's just kind of how they figure out. Also, a major thing I can point out is from the Department of Sanitation. They cleaned about, I believe it was 40,000 tons of trash, kind of. So that was a big thing. So these are the 4 C's of disaster preparedness, and this is what my team really focuses on when we're trying to make sure that we're doing the mitigation and response and recovery for disaster work. And that's communication, cooperation, coordinated, and collaboration. We're in a really kind of important area, since we are a membership organization and we do have capacity building. We have pretty much most of the nonprofits on the borough that would be the people making sure people are housed or fed. And then we also are working with the elected officials, the state government, the federal government, everyone from the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services to FEMA, our elected officials. Now, I was specifically communication. That was my job title. And that is what I did. And that was that's our major, went back a slide. That's our major work that I did. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the Staten Island Stay Strong, Stay Safe. That was part of a campaign that I created and I launched specifically for COVID, that we've increased from kind of all disaster preparedness work that we're doing. And these 4 C's are actually really integral to the work and how we continue to grow. And I'll kind of just do really quickly. I'm trying to be quick. I know we're short on time, but communications, which is where I specifically worked in doing, was making sure that we're not only amplifying all the information from New York City Emergency Management, Department of Health, New York City Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, FEMA, is that we're sending out email blasts, we're doing the social media, we're reaching Staten Islanders specifically where they are, we're making sure they have access to knowing where they can actually go to get to FEMA so they can file their claims, where they can, if they needed to evacuate, where they can evacuate to, because many people on our borough needed to evacuate their areas because of how badly we were affected. We launched last year the Staten Island Community Ambassadors Responding to Emergencies, Staten Island CARE. I know the acronym is cute, thank you. And specifically with that, since we have all these different community organizations, we found ambassadors within each different area sector. So from the arts department, from the arts sector, from the group homes, for disabilities, every single sector, we have ambassadors, and they will, since they know everyone in that area, they work with other organizations. We just make sure that they're getting the information directly and the most important, and they're sending it to not only their other people that they need, but also their constituents and the people that they're serving, so they have the most information, so we can reach the most people on the borough. Since we amplified our direct emails through this time, and we utilize social media even more, not only our email blasts, we kind of had exponential growth, especially during Hurricane Ida. And then also again in December when there was the Omicron increase, and during specifically Hurricane Ida, we had over 1,500% increase in followership, engagement. A lot of our posts where people were getting access to like how they can actually get to New York City resources, because not just Staten Island, but also we were getting New York City resources, were kind of shared and reshared hundreds of times. So this kind of proves that disaster work at the community level, that nice liaison between city, state, federal, and community was really important. And that kind of amplified our work and our trust within our community. Kind of to continued co-ed response, because again, it's not just during the disaster, but after. We did a needs assessment survey, what everyone needed. We participate on different coalitions in the city and the state to make sure what we need to do, and we're getting our resources, because again, we don't get as much as the rest of the city because we are a smaller borough. And then we're also making sure that, like I said, we don't necessarily do the recovery part, but we have a lot of partners that do. So like I've mentioned on here, the LTRO, which is long-term recovery organization, and Park Hospitality, Yellow Boots, Sky on Rescue, they are on the ground. And we were making sure this time that we were getting them the resources, the money, the cleaning supplies, so that they could do their work. And that's kind of how we did our recovery work this year. So now what you can do for response. So kind of make your plan. Whoa, went back too much. I wanted to rush, not that much. What you should do. So you should make your plan. Make sure that everyone has a go bag, and it's important to have copies of all your documents in there in a water safe container. That includes all your insurance cards, your marriage certificates, your licenses, your credit cards. Have all that copied and put in a water safe container. You can even just double Ziploc it sometimes. That's really important. Flashlight, batteries, cash, you kind of all know that, but a list of your medications is really important, and your dosages. God forbid something happened to you, it's always good to have that information. During disasters, you never know if you're going to have cell phone usage, so having contact numbers is really important as well. Everyone should have an emergency supply kit. Obviously, make sure it's weather related as well. Keep blankets, extra clothes, mittens, sunscreen if it's hot, and kind of snacks to make sure that you can pet. And also put one in your car, and that includes like cables and flares and a bunch of other things. And I can include links to other things you can put in there, but also knowing your evacuation zone. So especially within New York City, there's all these different resources. You can find out exactly where you live. I, for instance, do not live in an evacuation zone, but 3 blocks from me would be. And again, that also depends on the the disaster that's happening. During Hurricane Sandy, all of New York City was affected differently than it was during Hurricane Ida, and that's why they changed the zones. And you also need to make sure that when you're doing this planning, you're planning appropriately for people, for the older adults in your life, for those with disabilities, for people that are not English, and your pets, because they're important too. And another thing to plan is making sure that you have the right insurance. So if you are a renter, I can't tell you how many thousands of people just past Ida, they were living in all these apartments and they just lost everything because they didn't have renter's insurance and they don't get to claim it. Make sure you have your flood insurance if you're in certain areas. And then here's just some pictures that I wanted to include on how we were really affected. You could see this was just 3 or 4 months ago. This water is about completely enveloped. This is the main boulevard on my borough. This is my friend's house on the right hand side, and she has about 7 steps to go into her house, 8 steps, and you could tell it's about 4 steps high. Trees are down, and this is our park. You can see our reservoir. We had everything down. Staten Island only has 1 train. We don't have a subway, completely different from the rest of New York City, and our train was down for about 3 or 4 days. So hopefully I gained some time with that, and I think if you have any questions, I'll take them later.
Great presentation, Linda. Thank you so much. So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Eleanor Nwadanobi. She's a medical doctor and president of the Medical Women's International Association. She also specialized in health, gender, and human rights with the European Union Masters in Human Rights and Democratization from Venice, Italy. In 2005, Dr. Nwadanobi was elected as the national president of the Medical Women's Association of Nigeria. Dr. Nwadanobi is involved in working with women of all ages, including widows, and is also the founding co-chair of the steering committee of Every Woman Treaty and is the co-country representative for the Working Group on Women, Youth, Peace, and Security for UNOWAS. But her work also extends way beyond that, and I merely skimmed the surface of her many achievements and work accomplishments. But without further ado, please welcome Dr. Eleanor Nwadanobi.
Oh, thanks for that kind introduction, Doreen. You know, the Fordham Institute for Women and Girls annual conference with Elaine Congress and my friend, Professor Casper, Dr. Sarosh of IHAN, I consider my extended family. And, you know, despite it being midnight here in Abuja, Nigeria, I thought I would present in person. And like Hori, I'm just speaking from the heart and will share 1 or 2 stories. I shall be speaking on climate change and violence against women and girls as an intersect. And my work has been made easy by Professor Gabrielle Casper's students who spoke eloquently from the Australian perspective. And I will be speaking from the Nigerian perspective. And like we've heard already, no one country is homogeneous, but has varied climate-related challenges. So in the Nigeria context, for example, in the north, we have the shrinking of the Lake Chad with drought and desertification. In the Middle Belt, we have seen cyclical flooding from the confluence of 2 rivers, the Benue and the Niger rivers. In the south, we have soil erosion, depletion of rainforests of the Cross River. We have coastal erosion floods, and we have the impact of gas flaring in the oil-rich Niger Delta. We all know that land is a premium upon which we stand to breathe, upon which we build our shelters, be they mud huts or palaces. Land provides our food sustenance for living. And land is a place of burial of our dead. Now, when you have growing population pressures, or you have the growth of human settlements related to movements, with the expansion of public infrastructure and acquisition of land by large-scale farmers and other private commercial interests, that puts a strain on farmlands. And what eventually happens? You have increased frequency with disputes over the limited land that is available. In Nigeria, we have a practice of nomadic herders. Now, they have been deprived of their grazing land and find themselves migrating into the savanna and rainforests and into farms in order to feed their cattle. And that has brought about farmer-pastoralist conflicts and sometimes reprisal attacks with cattle rustling and rural banditry. We also have a situation regarding, and this has been said before, issues around land rights and land tenure, whereby in some areas women are not the landowners because they are excluded from Land Use Act and customary land tenure practices. Now, you also have an issue where the boundaries for land are sometimes just demarcated by cacti or by trees, again, causing conflict. And therefore, when you have desertification, or you have the fact that the land is shrinking, again, you have more conflict and disputes. Now let's look at coastal erosion and floods that lead to the loss of coastal vegetation. I reached out to a colleague in one of our coastal states whose home has been flooded for 3 consecutive years. Now she's a doctor. She said, I have moved everything upstairs, but you know, I'm still grateful to God because for those in the rural areas, the mud with which they used to build their homes has melted due to the flood. End of quote. So you can imagine homes being submerged and the fact that some of these homes are built with mud that just melts away. Another colleague in Adamawa State, where you have the drying up of the River Benue Basin, talked about how it has affected fishing and irrigation farming. And I quote her, she said, the river is a strip of its former self. This has reduced the yield of crops and affected the affordability of foodstuffs. Some of the farmlands have now become kidnappers' dens. When we go to the north of the country where you have the Lake Chad, I worked there as part of my day job. That is the area where, on account of the shrinking of the Lake Chad basin, which was an enormous body of water, we now have the Boko Haram conflict. And we documented, as I was the team lead for drafting the stabilization strategy for countries affected by the Boko Haram conflict, we documented the loss of traditional livelihoods and a propensity for those populations, because they had lost their traditional livelihoods, to explore alternative livelihoods. And sadly, this includes violent extremism. You know, when you look at the fact that the vicious cycle of the cause and effects of climate change have a direct and indirect bearing on violence. If we look specifically at women's economic empowerment, it is central to climate action. You have the vast majority of small-scale women farmers who contribute significantly to local food production, constituting 60% of the agricultural labor force. Yet, they own less of the land. And then, because of the cultural gender-related farming roles and techniques around crops and livestock rearing, women are marginalized. So when we look at economic empowerment, sometimes you will find development partners thinking that they are doing good by asking women to endlessly string beads as an empowerment generating or income generating venture. But there are non-stereotypical skills that women can engage in. So when we are building back in a conflict zone and you ask a woman to string beads or to knit a cap, and then there are middlemen, invariably she gets very little of that money. And yet it's the men who are offered the bricklaying and the roof building, whereas women can make more money if they are given some of these non-stereotypical opportunities. Usually they say, do not give the woman fish, teach her to fish. And I will say, teach her to move from fishing to actually owning the fishing boat. Let's now look at the intersect with violence and climate change. Because when we look at the climate and violence against women and girls nexus, climate security risks mentioned above are red flags and require urgent mitigation. When you look at climate change, as I've spoken about, that then brings about violent conflict, the vulnerabilities around sexual and economic predation exist, such as you have sexual violence, you have displaced women engaging in sex for food, you have the 3 S's that I call silence, stigma, and shame. You have the attendant psychological trauma and mental health effects. And how about harmful practices? Early marriage. Early marriage results to child widows. It results in children bearing children on account of displacement on account of climate change or violent conflict that happens on account of climate change. Let me be the voice of one of the young girls that I worked with. a child widow. Let me tell you her story. And I quote, "One day, Boko Haram had introduced me to someone and forced me to marry him, which I opposed. I just wanted to go home. But they forced me and threatened to kill me if I refused or disobeyed their directives. Eventually, I got married to the Boko Haram captor and I gave birth to 2 children. This is a child. After some time, information reached me through some of them that my husband, my Boko Haram husband, had been killed by the military. Again, they remarried me to another person, and I gave birth for him too, in agony, pain, and predicament. Someday, I finally made up my mind and bravely decided, with another girl who had been in captivity, because we were tired of such a terrible dilemma of forced marriage and hunger, that we must get out, even if they kill us. We sneaked out and blindly began our journey of unspecified miles in jungles, trekking for 5 to 6 days in a dark forest. At times, we were lucky to find a deposit of smelly, green-colored, dirty rainwater in a puddle to use. And our only food was when we saw fresh maize in a farm. We ate the fresh maize, and this is how our long, complex journey began. End of quote. That's the story of a child who suffered early marriage, early widowhood, remarriage, a childbearing children in the context of the desert and climate change, and escaping for her life from captors. Think about the mental health challenges, which are enormous. Our earlier presenter, Maria, spoke of climate anxiety. That is part of climate anxiety. But I want to leave us this evening with recommendations. When it comes to climate change, it's a whole of government and a whole of society approach that is needed. We must return to the tried and tested ancient landmarks of community conservation mechanisms. We need to conduct environmental fragility assessments to know the impact of environmental degradation and climate change on our cities and our rural communities, and involve the community members, men and women, in the assessments. We have to raise the awareness and strengthen the capacities of all stakeholders. Climate literacy should be mainstreamed in current and future learnings. We have to build community resilience to be able to absorb the shocks, as previous speakers have said. Then we need to ensure that there is dedicated funding in an investment that is climate proofed. And when it comes to violence against women and girls, it is a sad and shocking state that we do not have a global treaty to end all forms of violence against women and girls. You heard in the introduction that I'm the co-founder of the Every Woman Treaty, we are advocating for a global treaty to end all forms of violence against women and girls of all ages. And the world cannot wait any longer. In conclusion, the climate and violence against women and girls intersect is a good entry point for advancing the conversation towards a shift in underpinning gender inequalities and achieving a more holistic climate integration. Elbows locked, if we remain deliberate and intentional in our efforts, we can improve climate resilience and attain sustainable peace. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Eleanor. I completely agree. I hope and I wish you all the luck with that sustainability and peace, because that's what the world needs. I now have the privilege of introducing my cohort and a student that I have class with, an MSW student at Fordham GSS, Doreen.
Thank you, Linda. So a lot of the points I was going to make have already been said, so it makes my job easier. But I'm just echoing a lot of what the previous speaker said. So this is a flyer that I created just to show a professional action plan. And I think a lot of us already know this, but it's really just tying in all the knowledge we've acquired tonight, and hopefully all the research we will acquire even more after this on climate change and how we can take action in our professional and personal lives. So the first step, like mentioned before, is just to continue educating ourselves. So stay up to date on climate change crisis. And I think this is really important as professionals about learning how it affects our clients specifically. For social work, we work with a lot of vulnerable populations. And when these intense rainfall or environmental changes occur, these populations can't just like get up and leave, and they don't have the resources to. So finding out how they're being affected in our area can help us empower them and educate them on their risks as well. And that relates to climate anxiety. And if we're working directly in a professional setting with our clients, how can we educate them on climate anxiety? And now that we know how that's impacting their lives, how can we move forward in a treatment plan, for example? So knowledge is power. And so this is the first step. And the second step is to advocate. When we advocate for our clients and then advocating for environmental protection, once we've done the research, once we know how they're being affected in the area as well, talking to our local elected officials, maybe taking part in environmental groups or cleanups or things in our area to really share this information that we have acquired, especially tonight, maybe applying what we've learned tonight into our own practice as professionals. And like Dr. Maria Abate said, plant more trees. That's one way to do it, and empower others to do the same. And the third one is, as micro and macro workers, we need to really combine. It's often seen as separate, but we know that practice informs research, which then informs policies. So for those of us who are working in direct practice and with clients, like we have those a special insight on how climate change is affecting their lives and seeing those lived experiences. So let's take our insights and share them with policy level workers so that they're really seeing the lived experiences and humanizing these issues, especially because climate change is such a large one and it's seen as how's it going to affect us down the road, but a lot of us are living those changes right now. So it's just really just working together in the end, and then informing the needed change for environmental policies. So I hope we all continue to do this work because it's important work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. That was really great. I know we've gone over, it's almost 7:30. If anybody has any questions, I didn't see anything so far in the chat, but I think this is, put something in the chat and I will ask you to ask your question. But if not, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conference, everybody. I want to thank all of our speakers from all over the world. And, I think some people have come up with some great solutions. I'm going to run out and get a little tree tomorrow and plant it myself. But, thank you. Just thank you to everybody. I think this has really been an inspirational and enlightening series of talks. And Elaine, did you want to?
I just want to say thanks. I mean, it's been so both interesting and informative, and I thought I knew a little something about it. I found out I still had lots to learn, and I really feel inspired. And so let's go out there and let's continue our good work, and and learn more about it all along, and really try to advocate and work on making a difference.
Okay, I think
thanks. So anyway,
have a great rest of the evening, and
right.
See you soon, and see you tomorrow.
Right.
Casper, at your conference.
Right. We'll see you tomorrow, and also we'll see you in other activities this year, and tune in next year for the Women's Issues for the Women's Institute conference.